In this little video, I'm going to take a look at coefficients versus variables. It is sometimes difficult for students to determine which is a coefficient, which is a variable. In the beginning, first the earth cooled, then the dinosaurs. No, sorry, the airplane reference. In the beginning, your coefficients are going to be numbers. They're just going to be like 2s and -8s, that sort of thing. The variable is going to be the letter or the symbol. It doesn't have to be a letter, or it doesn't have to be a letter that you recognize. It can just be a symbol. One of the ones that I like in class is we just use a heart, because why not? I mean, what is it? It's a heart. The heart is 5. So yeah, you can solve for the value of a heart, I guess. So here we go. Coefficient, a number that counts how many of a thing you have. It can be represented by letter. Typically, the letters for coefficients are going to be the A, B, C's, that sort of thing. And the letters for the variables will be the X, Y's, and Z's. It is not, it is not wrong to use other letters for those pieces. K is a very persistent coefficient in physics. M is a persistent coefficient in algebra. It just depends on what you're studying. But knowing the relationship between the two and what each thing stands for, that actually is going to determine your coefficient versus your variable. If you don't know the value of it and they use a variable, or they use a letter, not a variable, but a letter for your coefficient, that means that you can most likely measure it, or it will be given to you in some form. A variable, though, is a symbol, usually a letter, but doesn't always have to be, that represents some unknown value, one that you can't necessarily measure directly, so you have to find it in other ways. If you have multiple letters, typically the first one that starts off is going to be your coefficient, and then the other one is going to be your variable. That's primarily what happens. But again, it's not a requirement. So let's identify some coefficients and variables down here. So our coefficients are going to be 4 and 5. And our variables here are the letters. They're just going to be X and Y. Now, one is associated with the other, but in this case, I'm just having you list them. Be very cautious on the signs. We have the same problem here that we did in talking about terms versus factors. Terms add, even though this feels like subtraction when you have -6, it still adds, so the term is going to be -6. So the coefficient, and we'll talk about how this is different than some people. There's really no full-on convention about this that I've heard of, but the coefficient here is -5, and I'm going to say -6, and the variable is then P. So some people will not call -6 a coefficient because there's no variable associated with it. You could argue that I can put any variable raised to the 0 power, because anything raised to the 0 power, other than 0 itself, is 1, and therefore would look like it's invisible. I can see the argument. Most often, if people refer to this unvariabled term, this constant term, as a coefficient, they will call it a constant coefficient. So they will label it somewhat differently than a normal variable coefficient. Finally, we reversed the order. Oh no, it doesn't change. Shh, don't tell anybody though. So the coefficients are 7 and 8, and the variable is m. And again, the same argument applies for this one where 7 is a constant. So these are the differences between coefficients and variables. Again, there's no convention for some of these, and so because of that, it just depends on how your teacher wants to tell you. I tend to be very open as long as you can create some kind of an argument for me to understand and it's cohesive, that sort of thing. I'm perfectly fine with it.